Hi, I'm Jim Linnell. If you've ever watched some of the videos we produce here at Elk Track Studio, you've seen me mention that the tools that I use are sometimes modified to do the job that I want them to do. In particular, two that I do that with is my modeling spoon and the pedal lifter. These are really easy for you to modify to make them do the job that you want them to do, and I'm going to show you how that's done right now. When tuning up a modeling spoon, this is the particular modeling spoon that I like to use. It comes to sort of a diamond or a spade type of a shape to the point, and as I mentioned, it's a little thick at the tip, and it's too thick for me to get the kind of detail that I like to get. So what I do is I'll take it on a stone and I'll work it down. Now what I'm using here is a diamond hone. Diamond hone is fairly coarse, fairly abrasive. It does a job a little bit quicker. You may have, some of you may have something like this around. It's a tri-hone, which comes with like 3 different grits on it. You can use that as well. I find that the diamond hone works pretty well. It gets to it. And what I'm doing here is I'm thinning it down. I want to have almost like a blade type point on it and on the edges. That's the whole idea. To get the kind of detail out of the work I do with a modeling spoon, I need to have that kind of crisp edge on it. And so this is the tool that this is the way I get my tool ready to do that. So this will take a few minutes, but basically just got to grind it down. You could probably take it on a grinding wheel or something like that, but if you're not careful, you can get it too hot. You'll lose your temper, and you can take off too much very easily. So this will take a few minutes. So be prepared to spend some time just working that down. As you're doing this grinding down, I'm not really so interested about thinning it down in the center, but I am interested in getting it thinned down at the edges and at the point. So as I'm working this back and forth like this, I'm actually got it angled a little bit so that I'm getting most of that abrasion is on the edges to thin it down there. Looking at this, it looks like we're getting really close now, and what I'm looking at is how thick the metal is at the very edge of my modeling spoon. I want it to be fairly sharp, and it feels fairly sharp when I touch it. We'll round that off or smooth that off too, but I've got it thinned down at the edge. It's nowhere near as thick at the edges and at the point as what it once was. So now we need to start polishing this back up again, because that was a pretty coarse abrasive we were using there. So I'm going to use next a ceramic stone that I have here. The ceramic, it does a good job of starting to smooth that out so that we can get a polish on it. It'll start to remove some of those grinding marks that I just left on there. And so I'm working it back and forth. Now here, I'm not so much focused on the edge. I want to get a nice domed spoon shape back on this. And so I'm rotating it a little bit as I'm working back and forth, but I'm working across the whole width of the tool. But again, I'm working to get rid of those grind marks. And if you'll notice, a lot of times I was using grinding in the direction of my spoon when I was doing the grinding, but now I'm actually working kind of crossways to that. I'm working back and forth, so the angle of that helps to remove some of it. But again, the goal here is to now restore that smooth, polished finish that a spoon has to have, and that's really important if you want to do really clean work. You've got to have a good smooth surface there. And this will get us close to where we need to be, but we've got several more polishing steps to follow this one. One of the things I'll do at this stage too is I'll now take and I'll blunt the edge. Even though I've got a nice fine edge here, I don't want it cutting sharp. I want it to still have a rounded, smooth edge on it. And so I'm going to actually take this up on the edge, and I'm going to blunt it a little bit. I'm not thinning it any. I just don't want it to have a knife type edge. I just want a good round, smooth, polished edge there. So that's what I'm doing now, is I'm actually blunting the edge and even the tip a little bit, although it's good to have a fairly sharp point on that tip. And then the next step after this is we'll take it down to an even finer abrasive. For this I'll use my my block here. My block has a piece of real fine sandpaper on the back. I think it's like 800 grit or something like that. And this then will take it on down to yet another level of polish. Start to put that same kind of shine back on it again. And you can see that it's starting to shine up again. You know, with all of your tools, modeling tools especially, but just a lot of the tools that we work with, the more polished and finished they are, the better they're going to work. So this is something that you ought to do, you know, probably with all your tools, whether you alter them or not, is just keep them polished up, working the way they should. And then I'm going to flip my block over now, and I'm going to go to the other side, and this side is my strop. This is what I use my swivel knife on to strop my swivel knife, and yep, that's exactly what I'm doing with this now. So I'm stropping my modeling spoon. And even after I get this the way I want it, right now the goal is to get it all polished up again so it's nice and smooth and everything. But once you have it like that, you need to maintain it and keep it polished up like that. So this is something you would do often anyway. But again, all of those edges, all of those places that you roughed it up and ground it down and so forth, now we're going to bring it back to a nice polished shape there. And you can see we're getting a really nice polish on that. So at this point, we'll take a piece of cased leather here, and we'll see how it works. What we should be able to get is obviously a nice smooth polished line without it dragging or snagging in the leather, and then I should be able to take the edges of that and actually produce a fairly crisp line if I wanted to. I could actually use this to do some very sharp and very steep beveling. And you know what, sometimes, like when we're doing things like eyes on an animal and so forth, sometimes we need to use just that point, and so now I've got a very sharp point. Let me show you here some of the places I would use that. This piece here is one, it's pretty well done, but little stuff like the little bumps and such that you see on the base of the antler, or the eyes on this animal right here were all done with the point of a modeling spoon. And this is why having that point nice and sharp, having this nice and polished is so important. The grain on the antlers of the animal were all done with the edge of a modeling spoon like this. So this is ready to do all of that work, and it takes those few minutes for you to get yours ready to do that. Another modeling tool that you see me reference quite often is it's called a deerfoot modeler, it's called a petal lifter, it's called a lot of different things, and the ones that you buy that are out there don't always have the kind of angle that I like to have on them for them to work perfectly well. So I'm going to take one and show you how I've also altered the one that I use. When you get them, they are sheared off. They have a pretty good angle, and they do have a very sharp point on them, but I like to have a little sharper angle, and I like to remove this heel that you see on here so that you don't have leave a dent in the leather. And again, it's the same process of what you just saw me do. I'm going to take on the diamond hone here again. I'm going to take and just work that heel down. I'm going to kind of round it off so that we don't have that distinct sharp edge. That it rounds down pretty good. What will happen as you do this, though, is it's also going to change the angle of the bevel on here just a little bit. It's going to give it a little bit sharper angle. I'm not touching the tip of it at all. I'm just working on that heel, but this will sharpen the angle, which also tends to make it work a little bit better as well. So working back and forth here. This one here goes fairly quickly. You can see I'm already getting it rounded off pretty good here. We'll take it down a little bit more. Yeah, we're getting it nice and rounded. See, and again, I'll just using this other end for a reference. You can see this sharp square corner here. I've removed that from this smaller end, and you can do this on both ends of this. I use this smaller one a lot more than I do the big one. And then we're going to go back to the same process we did with the other tool. We're going to now go to the ceramic stone here, and we'll start the polishing up stage on this. Again, we'll try to get rid of those coarse grind marks that were on there. So this is the beginning of that process. Once we've got it pretty well smoothed out, then we'll go to the sandpaper, that fine grit sandpaper I have on the back of this block. And again, we're going to working it down, getting a polish back on it. And again, I really haven't ever touched the cutting edge out on the tip. It should still have a pretty keen edge on it there. Again, all I'm looking at when I check it here is I'm just checking to see how polished it's getting, making sure that I'm getting rid of any grind marks that are on there. It's getting pretty close, and then we'll flip this over. And again, do the same thing with our strop. We're going to strop it again now and start to get that high polish on it. Again, just like we would any other cutting tool that you have, this is a cutting tool. And so we're going to get it polished up. So we have a nice mirrored finish on there. And this here, again, you can't polish one of these too much. So once you get it polished up, this is something you need to maintain. And then, of course, we've got to test it. And I happen to have a flower here that I did earlier that has the kinds of leaves on it that we would normally use this for. And once we get a good edge on this, we use this to undercut in these kind of scalloped areas like that. And of course, this is why I like the pedal lifters, that once I get underneath, I can now pry up on that a little bit, lift that up and cause that leather to stretch a little bit, and it gives me a lot of additional depth in my carving. So that's what a pedal lifter is, and it just takes that long for you to get one of these tuned up and working the way they should. You see how that adds so much more depth to your carving.